Welcome to our family safety webinar. Thank you for being here. We are going to wait a minute or so as people join us. We also have an interpreter here today, Vincente. He's in another, virtual room. So we need time for those that are attending. If they need Spanish interpretation, please, they can follow the directions on the slide. So again, welcome. Thank you for being here today. Again, we have a Spanish interpreter, so Vincente. So if people need this in Spanish, there's directions on the opening slide. What do you think, Diane? We're ready to go? Yes? Okay, thank you. All right, again, welcome to our safety webinar. And Diane, Brad, my name is Allison Brenelson. I am the superintendent. And there are several of us here tonight that will be presenting to you. I'm going to ask each presenter when they come to share that they introduce themselves and give their title. So we're just waiting for Diane Bradford. And she's going to pull up the PowerPoint. And while she does that, I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin since time immemorial. We respect this place and honor the sacred spiritual connection to the land, water, and its people, past, present, and future. By acknowledging these lands and their original indigenous inhabitants, we reach back to our own indigenous roots and reflect on the impacts of colonialism and the lands from which all of our people come. We are connected to our ancestors through this connection to land, for the land is what connects us all. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude to the traditional people of this territory, the Snohomish and Tulalip tribes, for their enduring care and protection of the land in which we currently share. Again, welcome. Thank you for being here. Diane, I don't know if you know that we're still on the opening slide. So that was yep. So we're going to go right into overview. So again, my name is Allison Brenelson. I am the superintendent of the school district. I became superintendent of January 2020. And when I was appointed to this position, we had a commitment. This team was committed to giving regular safety updates to our community. So we actually managed to have 2 before the pandemic hit. And then all of our updates in the last year and a half, family webinars, are pretty much have been COVID related. So we decided it was time to come back and provide, again, regular safety updates. Last year, when our kids were in distance learning, we really didn't have to worry about physical safety in terms of threats, because there really wasn't students in the physical building for much of the year. This year, we have seen some threats, and there are social media such as TikTok that have not been very helpful to us in terms of threats. So tonight, we're going to give you an overview of our safety department, reminders of situational awareness, overview of safety drills and plans that schools have, and then some other student-related safety items. So I'd like to turn it over to Cindy Steigerwald, the Director of Transportation and Safety. And there will be time so I'm just going to warn you, we have a lot of information to share with you, but we do want to answer questions. So at the end, we have reserved time to do a thought exchange where you can input your questions and we will go live and answer some of your questions. So this is the sit and get portion of this. So Cindy.
Thank you, Dr. Brunison. My name is Cindy Steigerwald. I am the Director of Transportation and Safety. And tonight, I'm here just to give you a brief overview of the Safety and Security Department and some of the work that we're doing. To start off with, I would like to introduce Tim Reeves. Tim, if you can, there you go. Tim is the manager of Safety and Security. We're very fortunate to have Tim with us as he's dedicated his career to safety and security, initially with Everett Police Department. And he finalized his career about the last decade of his career at Everett Police Department as the Sergeant for Youth Services. We were fortunate when he retired, he joined us so he could partner his attention to safety and security along with his focus and desire to serve students. So we're fortunate to have him with us. Mukilteo School District resides within 3 police jurisdictions within our district. And we have school resource officers represented at each of those. For Snohomish County Sheriff, we have an SRO, which is School Resource Officer at Mariner High School. For Mukilteo Police Department, we have an SRO at Kamiak High School. And Everett Police Department has an SRO at Explorer. Part of Tim's job is to foster the relationship and partnership with these police departments that help work in supporting students, not just in our building, but in the community, and keep us abreast of what's going on in our communities, as well as we can keep them abreast of what's going on in our schools. And to finalize kind of the last section or staffing of our safety and security department is our campus security. The campus security is located at several of our secondary schools and work in support with administration and our SROs in the buildings. They do require the same training that our school resource officers have from OSBI, which cover things such as de-escalation, trauma-informed practices. Really, schools, the campus security, their role is to be a resource to students, not just provide supervision, but help identify students that need resources and help get them to the right people in our buildings to provide them those resources. So we follow 4 phases of incident management, and that falls under the incident command structure that is recommended by FEMA. In combination with our all hazards approach, we look through the lens of that to look at the 4 phases, which include prevention and mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery. You can kind of filter that down a little bit finer, and it's really before an incident, during the incident, and following the incident. So we look at every type of situation that we could have, apply that lens as we are developing our plans. So we're going to start off first with prevention and mitigation and talk about situational awareness. So the first thing about situational awareness is being aware of what's happening around you. So you could start with a question, where are you? That sounds like a really simple question and maybe not all that important, but it's an extremely important question for you. Not just in our school setting, but just to be aware of all the time, because where you are dictates what you need to be watching. I'll give you an example of that. Every situation has a baseline. What I mean by baseline is what would be the normal environment for that situation. So for example, a teacher in a classroom, the baseline for a classroom might be kids are sitting at their desk and they talk in class voice, they raise their hands, they ask permission to move around. That would be the baseline, the environment for that classroom. If all of a sudden you hear a student scream out or you see all the kids running to the opposite end of the classroom, that's going to put you on high alert and let you know something's out of the ordinary. Now, those same activities, if you're a paraeducator working on as playground supervision, and all of a sudden you hear a student scream and you see kids running around, that's not going to put you on high alert because that would be normal activity for a playground. So it's knowing where you're at, what the normal baseline activity is, and then being alert and aware when something abnormal happens in that situation. One of the very foundational things we did at Mukilteo at the very beginning was identifying a protocol or a baseline that all staff must wear an ID badge. If you're staff, you have to have an ID badge. And if you're a visitor, you have to have an ID badge, because we all know that's a baseline. So when we're walking through our buildings and we see someone without a badge, we know, that looks unusual. So what we've empowered staff and students is to be able to go up and say, hey, can I help you? Are you looking for something? You very quickly know if someone doesn't belong by how they respond to that question. And then you could follow actions, take action steps to alert that there may be a danger. So the other question to look at is anything or anyone around you a threat to your health or safety. That's also really important to understand your environment, to know what are the things I need to be worried about and what should I be paying attention to. A key component to that is making sure we don't allow ourselves to get caught by focus blocks or focus locks. Cell phones are one of the most prominent focus locks out there. And I'll give you an example of this also. A few months ago, I was walking on one of our campuses, and as I was walking on the sidewalk, a young lady was walking towards me, and she was very busy looking at her cell phone. Her head was down the whole time. And I started to get out of the way, and I thought, nope, I'm not going to. I want to do a little experiment. So I stayed on my path, and at the very last minute, I had to move over so this young lady and I did not collide. I can tell you to this day, I don't know if she ever knew I was there. If I wouldn't have taken the steps to move away, her focus was so intent on her cell phone, she had no idea that she was about to collide with me. That also left her completely unprotected and unaware of her situation. And if I would have had ill intent, I could have snuck up on her, not even snuck up on her, I could have just taken action. So think of that and apply it for yourself. Look at how many people, as you're walking in parking lots, are on cell phones and they're completely unaware of what's happening around them. Those are the type of spaces when that you need to make sure that you put your cell phones away, don't have focus locks, be aware of your situation, and keep yourself safe. Practice that at home with your kids, because we are practicing that in our schools also. So drills are also part of prevention and mitigation, and they also are what helps prepare us for the during. So Washington State Law and Mukilteo School Board Policy 3432 require us to have at least one drill a month. There's 4 different types of drill categories, and there's shelter in place, lockdown, evacuation, and earthquake. Again, we do one of these a month, the only one that we really always do in earthquake would be in October, because we do participate in the shakeout, the Washington State shakeout. Otherwise, the schools can choose which ones they're doing at which times. But as we move into drills, as I said, it's prevention and mitigation, but the purpose of a drill is to prepare us for the during. And in order to prepare us for the during, we have to try to make them be realistic. And we have to, what we want to do is get our staff and our students thinking about what would I do if this happened? So the other thing to remember is safety isn't always convenient. So I remember when I went to school, you had drills, and you always had them at the perfect time, and you'd follow step A, B, C, and D. Now we really want to mix our drills up and not always have it be at the convenient time. So we might have an evacuation drill at during lunch, because unfortunately, when bad things happen, they don't make sure that it's convenient for us. The other thing we might do is throw some variables in. So for example, for evacuation, we have evacuation map routes that everybody knows which path they follow. But what if we had a fire and the east hallway was actually where the fire was, and that was in your evacuation route? We need people to be thinking about, okay, if I couldn't use that evacuation route, where would I go? So that's how we drill. Occasionally on a drill, we'll do an evacuation and we'll block an exit. And that empowers people to start thinking about those what ifs. Then we have full lockdowns. Lockdowns are what the drill that prepare us for if we had an imminent danger inside the building. And studies have shown that one of the safest places to be in a building if there is a threat is in a locked classroom. And we were fortunate enough and very grateful for our community to support our last capital bond that we were able to add interior door locks to all of our classrooms. So now teachers are able to lock their classrooms without even opening a door, which is wonderful. And so what we do in a full lockdown, the students would lock down and then go into a place in the classroom off away from windows where people couldn't see in and secure themselves. But again, applying situational awareness, we also really work with staff and train that sometimes that's not the best answer, and you can take a look at that and walk through and think of that. So the example would be, say the dangers in the cafeteria, and the PA system was able to come across and say that the danger was in the cafeteria, and maybe you're in a classroom or an area that is completely away from the cafeteria, and you're right next to an exit that would take you off campus and total to safety. That would be something that a teacher and her students could look at, or their students could look at and make that determination, versus if you're in a classroom right in the hall across from the cafeteria, your situational awareness, hearing that, understanding what's going on, would know that lockdown in the classroom would be your best action step. So lockout is one of our most common during type of activities, because this actually a lockout, what that means is there isn't an imminent threat in the building, but there's some police activity going outside the building. So what we want to do is lock our perimeter. And so say there's been a car theft and the police notify us that they're tracking someone in the neighborhood. We call for a lockout, which then allows for students to still interact and move around the building somewhat normally inside, but we lock out all of our perimeter. That's going to be a little bit dependent on the building, because all of our buildings are very different. But again, the intent is to try to minimize the change of in the building activity and keep that keep the threat outside, or keep our buildings locked out. Shelter in place is basically the same as a lockdown, except for we're not locking out people or that type of a threat. It's an environment lockout. So we're right next to Payne Field. So say there's an airplane crash and there's jet fuel. The shelter in place would be called, which we then go into lockdown, but it includes shutting down our HVAC systems, making sure that we are cutting off any extra air circulation that would be coming from the outside in. And then we maintain in that lockdown shelter in place situation until we're told it's clear. And then earthquake, again, Pacific Northwest, it's important for us to practice those. That is knowing where to go, how to protect yourself during the earthquake, and also the steps to take after the shaking stops. So in our emergency operation plans, using the incident command and the all hazards, Tim Reeves was able to work with a large group of people, some administration from the school, Snohomish County Emergency Management, police officers, and identify 22 of the more common, I hate to say common, but 22 of the more common types of incidences that could happen in our buildings. Those range from natural, environmental, or man-made. Once they determine those 22 different types, then they use that ICS structure to identify the roles and identify the different characteristics, or what would possibly happen in that incident, and then develop action steps for administration and action steps for staff. That allows then administration and staff to work together and then provide the direction to students so they know which actions to take. A key note on this, once this was developed and before final implementation, it was actually sent up to FEMA to review. And they looked through all of our plans and credited us with good work. So that very, very nice job, Tim Reeves, on managing that process. Then because at the time of an emergency, you might not want to reference this big thick binder. And we also know people, again, in an emergency, you need to rely on your muscle memory. You need to rely on the drills that we've done, but you might need a quick little review. So we've created emergency flip charts that are in every classroom. And they also have these 22 incidences that you can just go to get a quick summary to kind of get you on track and know where you're going and start your action steps. And finally, we have communication. And communication really is all 4 phases. It's important. And I truly believe it's probably one of the areas that we've seen a lot of improvement over the last few years in our district. Some of the things that we've done is added RAVE emergency communication system. This is a cell phone app that all staff can have, and it is integrated with the 911 dispatch system. So as soon as a staff member saw or had a concern, they would be able to press this app. It would directly go to 911, not only to have verbal communication with them, but it also uses a geocode system, which would allow them to know exactly where that staff member is in our buildings, so that they could have first responders go directly to that location. The other thing that's important to know about this is the fact that I said that any staff member, many years ago, it was really, if there was an emergency, you waited for an administrator to make the call. And what we've seen by looking through different incidences that have happened around the world is it's real time. We don't want to wait and rely on someone else to see or report. So we've empowered all of our staff. If you see something, say something. And if you see something, do something. So the RAVE 911 app really helps us support that. We've also added Safe Schools Alert, which allows our students, our staff, our community to anonymously give reports if there's a concern, that allows us real-time 24/7 to get those alerts and respond. In addition, we've really used our Blackboard mass communication. I'm sure through COVID, you've seen that. You've gotten a lot of the communication from Diane, does a fabulous job at that. But we also have that set up so for safety and security concerns. So we now have the ability to communicate with you, our families, much more effectively. So 2 of the takeaways before I move on to my peers that I'd like you to remember is first, situational awareness. It is so important for all of us. Safety is a responsibility of us all. And making sure that we're communicating, we're reporting what we see, sharing our concerns. So don't forget, be aware, keep yourself and your family safe. And if you see something, say something. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Beth Vanderveen, and I am the Director of Student Services and Athletics for the district. In my role as student services, I work with all of our buildings, pre-K through 12, on a variety of topics. And so a couple of those I'm going to mention today in our presentation. So the first one is student safety assessments. Sometimes they're referred to as student threat assessments, but in our district, we call them safety assessments, just because sometimes not everything is necessarily a threat. And sometimes the word threat is more alarming to families and parents when you're working with students than safety. So first and foremost, we want to take a look at whether or not a student poses a safety concern to themselves or their buildings through a process that we have, or a system that we have called student safety assessments. We've had building administrators and teams trained through our Northwest Educational Service districts on the Salem-Kaiser model, which we have adopted. And and we also have a board policy and procedures, but it's a protocol that we use to determine whether or not a student poses a threat or is a safety concern to themselves or others. In that training, they shared these two pictures of cats, and they're a great depiction of kind of the process that we go to in determining a safety level of a student. On the left-hand side, you see the scared cat. We all can take a look at that picture and go, I am not going anywhere near that cat. If I try to pick that cat up, that cat's going to eat me alive. It's going to scratch me. It's going to bite me. It's going to hiss. I'm not going anywhere near that cat. I'm scared of that cat. On the right-hand side, we have the cat that we go, oh, that's a cute cat walking along the fence. But little do we know that that cat may be on the prowl, on the hunt. And so I want you to think of those two pictures as we go to the next slide. So in our student safety assessment system, as I mentioned, we have a protocol designed for the use with students who are making or posing a threat of violence directed at other people. So we compile and have trained staff at each of our buildings to serve as a safety assessment team. And this team is a combination of administrators, school counselor, possibly a school psych, dean of students, our very own Tim Reeves, a school resource officer. Kind of depends on the situation and the student involved as who we might compile to be a safety assessment team. The process is first and foremost the incident. And so we have to take a look at, if we refer back to those two cats, we have an incident that takes place at school. Let's say it's a fight in the hallway. And so we have a fight, we break up the fight, and one of the students says, I'm going to kill you. Okay. Now, is that the cat on the left? He's scared, he's amped up, his adrenaline's working. Does he really mean he or she's going to kill someone? Or is it the cat on the right? Or is it no cat whatsoever? So we have to take a look at each individual situation and each incident on really, is that student really posing a threat of violence towards somebody? Or was it just in the heat of the moment and they were that scared cat and they were reaching out because they had just been in a fight? Another incident might be, let's say somebody brings it to our attention that we have a student who they have found maybe it's our tech department, over the course of 3 months, they've been researching how to make a bomb, how to explode a bomb, how to place a bomb. And that's the cat on the right. Very unassuming, very nice student, would never think, in the world that person would do any kind of harm or threat to somebody. And so we have to look at each individual situation, each individual student, and we do that through a protocol. As we're looking at the incident, we may determine that we have the need for a level 1 assessment. And so if we do, we compile the team, we use our protocol. There's teacher questionnaires, student questionnaires, parent questionnaires, maybe victim or witness questionnaires that we use, all part of the assessment process. Once we've compiled the assessment, we'll make a determination on whether or not, yes, there is a threat. And if there is, we need to implement a plan to protect not only the student making the threat, but anybody that is maybe a victim or identified target. And then, of course, we want to communicate with students, staff, parents, and guardians that are involved with the situation. We may, based on that level 1 assessment, what I call kick up to a level 2 safety assessment, which means it comes up to the district office and to some of our community partners to take a different look with a different eye to see what's really going on with the incident, what's going on with the student and or students involved, and make a determination of what the next plan of action is. So that's called our student safety assessment. Again, we have a board policy and procedures and protocols that we use in that process. Next slide, please. One of the other responsibilities that I have is working with buildings regarding student harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And we like to use these words a lot, especially if we're frustrated maybe with what's happening with our student at a school. But it's really important, and as we go through this process, as we're working with families and students, that we understand the definitions between those 3 words. So bullying is defined as unwanted aggressive behavior among school-aged children that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. And power imbalance is really important in that sentence. The behavior is repeated or has the potential to be repeated over time. So key words in that definition is power imbalance, repeated, or potential to be repeated over time. Intimidation is applied or overt threats of physical violence. Harassment is any malicious act which causes harm to any person's physical or mental well-being. And then we also include, although it's not part of the HIB, but we include hazing, because sometimes we have hazing that occurs. And hazing is any method of an intimidation or initiation into a student organization or living group that causes or is likely to cause bodily danger or physical harm or serious mental or emotional harm. Again, so each one has kind of a little bit different definition when we're looking at what we call HIB incidences. So any student who believes that they have been a target of unresolved, severe, or persistent harassment, intimidation, or bullying, or any other person in the school community who observes or receives notice that a student has or may be a target of HIB may report incidences verbally or in writing to any staff member. Okay, so it doesn't have to just necessarily be the building principal. It can be the teacher, it can be a paraeducator. It could be a bus driver where somebody shares that this is that they perceive to be a target of unresolved, severe, or persistent HIB. Any staff member who receives an oral or written report of HIB shall try to resolve the incident immediately. Think of kids out on the playground. People will try to resolve any conflict between kids immediately when that incident takes place. If the incident is resolved and does not meet the definition of a HIB, no further action is required. However, all reports of unresolved, severe, or persistent HIB will be recorded on our district incident reporting form and referred to the building principal or designee. All reports of unresolved, severe, or persistent HIB will be investigated with reasonable promptness. We have a board policy and procedures regarding student harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And within those policies and procedures outlines the timeline for which any report needs to be investigated. We also have resources on our Student Services District website, including the district incident reporting form. And now I believe I'm turning it over to Mr. Haggerty. Oh, nope, I have one more thing. Sorry about that. Sorry, Mr. Haggerty. Last is how we address intimidation and bullying. We teach and inform students. We have age-appropriate materials and curriculum that outline prevention strategies and identify what is and is not harassment, intimidation, and bullying, as well as how to report incidences. We also have annual staff training, and that's for all staff within the district, on our policies and procedures, including their roles and responsibilities, and kind of going back to what Ms. Steigerwald was talking about, situational awareness and being aware of our surroundings and the areas that we are responsible for, and also includes how to access our reporting forms and materials and resources for both students and staff. And now, Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you, Beth. Good evening, everybody. My name is Pat Haggerty. I have the privilege to serve as the Executive Director of Secondary Education. So I work with all high schools and middle schools, their principals and administrators and staffs. And it's also a privilege to work with the team that you see here this evening. And I wanted to spend just a few minutes on one particular form of harassment that's worthy of being recognized, called out, and reflected on. And it has received a lot of recent attention across the nation and locally, We've seen student action related to sexual harassment in Bellevue, in Snohomish, in Everett, and in Seattle, where students have expressed their concerns about the prevalence of harassment and sexual assault, and also about their perception of an inconsistent or inadequate support from schools. So that's the foundation of what I wanted to share. And, you know, we often talk about policies and procedures, but I have to say that as a principal, a former principal, the go-to place to help guide my thinking, and that I always share with families, is the Students' Rights and Responsibilities Handbook. And I want to put that link in the chat for folks to look at. And Diane, if you would, please go to that link right now. And I want to focus on page 18. I'm sorry, this takes you to the district webpage, and that first link is for the rights and responsibility. And as you can see, it is in multiple languages. On page 18, it reflects part of what Beth was describing, was the definition of harassment that talks about actions that define harassment, the impacts, physical harm, substantially interfering with education, severe, persistent, and pervasive, and disrupting the operation of a school. And it includes examples. And number 4 down in that list of examples discusses sexual harassment, unwelcome sexual advances, verbal harassment of a sexual nature, unwelcome pressure for sexual activity. It's important that you have access and knowledge about this as families, because it is this guide and the policies, and would you mind, Diane, to go down to page 27 here, the policies that guide this. In our policy, it actually calls out the language of sexual assault. And that's the piece that has come to greater attention for our students, for their concerns, and that our principals have been working very carefully to help support students with. Diane, you could go back to that original slide. I direct you there to have a look at on your own time what that foundational policy says about sexual harassment. And basically we say, for starters, we prohibit harassment of our students. And it defines acts of sexual violence as part of that prohibition. If you get the chance to read through that policy, we talk about our investigation and our response. We demand prompt investigation and action. And any allegations of criminal misconduct are reported to law enforcement. And any suspected child abuse is also reported to law enforcement or child protective services. We take sexual harassment, as with all harassment, very seriously. And while a criminal investigation may be going on, we still conduct our internal investigation as it relates to student discipline. If you look further in our policy, you'll see that our staff responsibilities are to inform our district Title IX coordinator. That's Dan Dizon at our central office. And all of us are responsible for directing all complaints through the formal process. So while it sounds very bureaucratic and very cold, we want to make sure that we are following, dotting every I, crossing every T in support of our students. We also make it clear, because Title IX directs us, that any retaliation against an individual, because they filed a complaint, is against the law and will be punished by the law and by our discipline code for students. Similarly, because these are so serious accusations, our policy also stipulates that any false accusations are likewise punishable. And I share that with you just to heighten the importance of this has for our students. They've told us this, and to cement for you the dedication of our actions in support of kids when they raise these very serious issues with us. If you go to the next slide, please, Diane. Somewhat related to this is the question that arises around student discipline of how do I know that a student who has done harm, whether it's sexual harassment or something else, has been appropriately disciplined or consequenced? My kid has been bullied. How do I know that the perpetrator has been taken care of? Well, the truth is you do not get to know the specifics of any discipline for that student. And that's part of individual privacy that we stick to by law. And I'll explain that in just a moment. But I do want to give you some context for our actions related to student discipline. Diane, would you go to the next slide? We are guided under student discipline by the laws of the state of Washington and the federal laws, but also by the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction and their discipline guidance. They interpret the laws for us. In the past decade, it's important that you know, we've seen a continuing evolution or change of the philosophy behind our response to student behavior. And it's true in discipline laws and state guidance. Way back when I was a kid, discipline was summary, complete, and final. And if you were long-term suspended oftentimes, there was no way back. Good luck. That has changed. The state says our discipline policies and procedures must ensure due process protections for students. That's all students, and should provide a continuum of equitable, culturally responsible instructional approaches. In other words, there has to be a range of ways that we approach teaching students how best to behave and meet our behavioral expectations. So summary judgment, there is judgment, but it must happen in the context of due process and instruction because we're a teaching and learning institution. Diane, would you go to the next slide, please? In Mukilteo, we believe students can learn and can be taught how to manage their behaviors. And we have 3 general rules of conduct that guide the behavior of students: respecting the rights and property of themselves and others, behave in a manner that creates a positive learning environment or maintains that, and respects the health and safety of others. Additionally, our district emphasizes the focus on positive behaviors, on growth, that's helping kids grow and learn, and making sure our consequences are focused on the behavior and not targeting an individual because of their expression, how they present themselves, their identity, etc. It really is focused on behaviors. Diane, would you go on to the next slide? So how do I know that a student who's done harm has been appropriately disciplined or consequence? And again, you can't know because of student privacy. That's the next slide. But you can start with a good faith belief, as Beth has expressed and Cindy, that our schools take this work very seriously and that we follow our district policies and procedures diligently. That's why I wanted to share them with you. And we pay strict adherence to local, state, and federal laws and regulations. And that due process and individual dignity are also central to our practices. That individual dignity is tied to this next slide, which is about student privacy. Under the FERPA, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, a federal law, a school cannot disclose information about an individual student's record to somebody else outside of their family unless the student's parent has provided written consent. So when I have a concern that the kid who's been bullying my daughter is not appropriate consequenced, I cannot know the specifics because that's part of their educational record. But I can, by working with the principal, by studying what we are routinely doing through our policies and our practices and our student handbook, I can be certain that our schools are following in good faith all of those due process protections and all of those foundational beliefs about student discipline and consequences. So that's that kind of uncertain world that we find ourselves in, wanting to know more, not being able to know the individual circumstance of kids that are not our own, but also nurturing that confidence and that knowledge that we know our schools are doing their utmost to protect students. Not sure who owns this slide, sorry.
Yeah, we're going to give it to Diane. Thank you.
I can jump in there. Hi, thank you, Mr. Haggerty. My name is Diane Bradford. I'm the Communications Director for the school district. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is our last slide before we go into gathering and answering questions, but we will post this slideshow as well as the recording from tonight on the website in the next couple of days. So at that time, if you are interested in any of the resources listed at the end of this presentation, these are linked for your convenience. So some of these we did not go in or just went in a little bit. If you would like to do some of your own research or go further into any of this, this will be on the website in a couple of days. So now we have a chance to hear from you and gather some of your questions. And we are going to use a process called Thought Exchange. It's a tool where you can type in your questions. It's a very open-ended question, just going to ask you what kinds of remaining questions and thoughts you might have about school safety. Anything about school safety is fair game. And then after you put in your questions, you can do several, you can do one, or you can do none. You'll have a chance to see what other questions people have posed or other thoughts people have shared. And you can rate those by assigning the number of stars. The more stars that you assign to rate that, the higher or more agreement you're showing for that question or that thought or comment. And then after about 5 minutes or 6 minutes, depending how much time we need, we'll see those questions in order of the highest rated, and we'll just start to answer all the ones that we can in the time that remains. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to share this thought exchange. So you can, let me get the link and put it in the chat. So I've put the link in the chat if you want to click on that to start the thought exchange, or if you have a mobile device, you can hold it up and scan that QR square code on the screen, or you can go to that website, tejoin.com, and enter in this code. There are lots of ways you can join in. So hopefully you can find something easy for your device. And then as soon as people start to enter their questions and their thoughts, we'll see them start to populate here on the screen. So I'm going to start the timer. We've got about 5 minutes, and if we need one more minute, we might have time to extend it. We'll see how the questions are coming in. It has English and other languages. So if you speak Spanish or another language, you should be able to write your answer in Spanish. And when we see it on our end, it should be in English. All right. So go ahead and start. And so for the people who are, and some people have entered in, I see some questions into the chat. And as you notice, it's only displaying for probably us hosts. So please use the thought exchange, click on that link, use the thought exchange to put your questions in so that we can answer them here along with everybody else's at the end. And I forgot to cue up some music. I should have done some music for this time. I'll see if I can find something real quick. Okay, let's do about 30 more seconds. It looks like the thoughts are starting to slow down. And so I would say finish up your last thought and move on to rate a few, and then we'll get to answering some of these. All right, well, thank you for enduring my elevator music that I found on quick notice. I'm going to go ahead and stop our questions so that we can get to answering some of these. It looks like there's some really good ones. You can see here at the top that many of you participated. Thank you. That leads to a much better discussion here. 36 thoughts or comments, and then growing number of ratings. So I'm going to go ahead and stop so we can now answer these. All right, thank you very much for your participation. We're going to start at the top. Again, this automatically puts the most widely rated or highly rated questions or thoughts towards the top. So we'll start there and go to as many as we can. The first one here is, what work has been done with community agencies like the Mukilteo Police, Snohomish County Emergency Responders Crisis Team to prepare a response to an active shooter? So this one is probably one that touches many different departments and many different people in our school district, including some of the people with us in this room. So I just saw Cindy come off mute. Do you want to start on this one, Cindy? And then those of us can chime in if we have something to add.
Absolutely, I can start. And Tim would also be a good one to respond to this. So as I said, Tim is working in partnership with all of them. We have opened up, we meet regularly with all of them. Snohomish County has actually used our site to do training, and we've invited them to do tabletop exercises in our buildings. So we'll have someone from one of the jurisdictions come through and do tabletop exercises with our staff. Tim, are there some other? I know we meet with Snohomish County Emergency Management. We've had them review our plans. So there's just it's a partnership. We're constantly working with all the different jurisdictions to review our plans, to drill, and to we offer them our facility if their teams want to drill also, which is what Snohomish County Sheriff did.
Yeah, excuse me. And the other thing I would add is that the best active shooter incident is the one that doesn't happen. And so we continually work in conjunction with the 3 districts that we work with, or the jurisdictions, I should say, in Mukilteo, Sonoma County, and Everett, in that we are sharing information back and forth, working together on a number of different training scenarios all the time. Recently, during the break, some of the patrol officers that don't always get to the schools were touring some of our schools in their different jurisdictions. The Snohomish County Regional SWAT team trained at our bus barn last spring for a possible scenario involving a school bus. So it's a continual cooperation with the law enforcement agencies and the Mukilteo School District.
Thank you. I want to go on to the next one too, about if there is an emergency at the school, as parents, is there a staging area that we should report to? Yes, we do have those. And so I'm going to again look to Cindy and Tim to offer a little bit more detail on how parents, I can speak to the how parents would get notified part, but I think it makes more sense for Cindy and Tim to start that.
Absolutely. All right. Yes, we do have locations, offsite reunification locations. We don't make those public because obviously we don't want them to be a secondary target. So we would wait and use that Diane's ability for that mass communication to get that out at the time. as hard as it would be, and I understand that I'm a parent of 4 myself, at the time of emergency, as much as possible, we want families to stay home and wait for communication from us, because it's important that we don't block our roads. We leave access for our first responders, and when everybody comes to the site, it can actually hinder the process. So as much as possible, wait till you get direction. And then at that time, we would give direction to our reunification site, or if it was clear for you to come to the building itself.
Thanks, Cindy. And I would just add, that's the most critical thing, because when we do send out communication, we'll provide details when and where to come. But things you can do ahead of time is, as a family, to have an emergency or a backup person who could pick up your children who are on the list at your child's school. If you're not available, somebody who is authorized to pick up your child will ask parents to bring their ID. There's all kinds of details, but it's helpful for families to plan ahead. And we do have some information on our district website on how to prepare, as well as in the back of the family handbook that comes out every year. So you might thumb through the back there. There's a whole section about reunification planning. Next question is, how quickly are safety assessments done once the risk is identified? 12 hours, 24 hours? I think this is a Beth question.
And it's a very good question too. So we have a flow chart that we use for our safety assessment teams. And so first and foremost, if a student poses an imminent danger or risk, the first thing a school is asked to do is to call 911. So if 911 is not needed at that time, oftentimes the student who's posing a threat or a safety risk will be emergency expelled, kind of pending an investigation, which would include the safety assessment. Safety assessments can be time consuming over the course of 1 to 3 days, depending on how easy it is to convene the safety assessment team, how cooperative the student and parent are in participating in that process, and then doing our due diligence. So doing the teacher questionnaires, the student questionnaires, witness questionnaires, parent questionnaires. So it can take some time in gathering that information in order to make a good determination on whether or not it's safe to bring the student back and under what conditions, and or if we need to implement plans to protect. So we want to work quickly, but not too fast, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Beth. I think I can handle the next question, and maybe Tim, if you want to jump in here, or Cindy. How do you identify threats on social media? This one's a really complicated moving target. Then there's no one way, it's actually many ways. I will say probably the best and fastest way is the minute a kid sees it and either tells a trusted adult, somebody, whether it's at school or their parent, and they report it either to the school or by calling 911. So no matter how that threat comes in or is reported, if it goes to the police first, they reach out to the school and the district. And if it comes to the school first, of course, we reach out to law enforcement. So we have a tight partnership. And so I would worry less about where it's reported, but the critical thing, we really try to encourage our students. And as Cindy said, you see something, say something. That includes social media too. That's the quickest way we learn about those kinds of things. As you can imagine, social media is huge. We can't possibly be everywhere all the time. So as soon as a student or if an adult sees it, they should report it right away, and we'll get a hold of that, and then law enforcement will investigate. We could jump on that. Anything to add, Cindy or Tim, on that?
Actually, I would add something, Diane. I put in the chat our Safe Schools alert, and Diane's absolutely right. They often come my way as executive director of secondary, And it's usually the result of a student or a parent feeling concerned about something that they see, and they say something. They contact the principal, or they submit it through our Safe Schools alert. We also have a mechanism that captures for student work on our servers any concerning language that might arise. And so that's also a trigger that we're alerted to follow up. And then, as Diane said, it is a very seamless and collaborative relationship between ourselves and law enforcement as we quickly try to identify, and very successfully identify, who might be involved and what level of threat it actually might entail.
And just to discern something that Pat said, that that trigger or filter is for school district devices only. So we don't have a mechanism for tracking or filtering on personal devices. So everybody's phone, personal device that they might bring in with them, we don't have a way to have, and I can't even imagine the volume, but certainly law enforcement also look for things that are concerning as well. And if they see something on their own, they will contact us as well. So that's a good question. How do you determine if a threat is legitimate or not? This might be a good question for Tim and Cindy to start out with, if you're comfortable.
I can take that, I guess. We investigate every threat like they are credible. That's how we start out, because that's the safest way to do it. And we investigate it just like you would a crime. You talk to everybody that you can about the threat, and you try to get to the source as quickly as you can. And that's where our cooperation with law enforcement makes a big difference. We do get calls in the middle of the night when somebody notifies us of a threat, and we'll start working in the middle of the night if we have to, and working in conjunction with law enforcement. And we try and get to the key is to get to where that threat started and who issued that threat, and try and get to that as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Tim. What do the schools do to ease students' fears or trauma after a safety incident and repair mental health? A recent incident at Explorer caused students stress about eating lunch in the lockdown cafeteria while there is COVID and returning the next day. Pat, do you want to talk a little bit about how the schools support students after an incident like that?
Certainly. When we have an incident like that, it is often our mobilization of our student counselors, both the counselors that are within the building, and we call upon our partner schools to help out, because we know that any kind of incident that disrupts the life of the school can have an ongoing kind of impact on student stress and their mental health. It's been especially true, I think we all recognize, in our return to in-person learning in the pandemic. So in this instance, it is the guidance and the leadership of the principal and the administrative staff. It's the support of all of our paraeducators and counselors within the school. But it is by no means perfect, that's for sure. We encourage our kids in all of these instances to seek out support and help. And I would say to families, if there's continuing, lingering stress or trauma as a result of it, to reach out to your student administrator and counselor to help find some additional supports.
Thanks, Pat. Somebody asked, can you share the volume of each level of threat in the past few years, assessing the efficacy of implemented protocols in identifying threats? I'm not sure if we have that at our fingertips, but I will look to Cindy and Tim if you have anything you can offer here about the volume of different kinds of threats over the past few years.
I don't say that I really have could give into any specifics. I think what we see, just like in everything, we kind of ebbs and flows. So there'll just be times where it gets very quiet and dormant, and then depending, sometimes around breaks, different times of years when activities change. But really, it's just a constant action for us to be prepared and to be watching and listening and supporting students. So there really isn't a time that we're more active or less active. It's just it's constant work.
I will say that sometimes on social media type threats and rumors, right, those tend to be very well, we'll say ripe for copycats, right? So we might see something that starts on the East Coast, and with social media, people will see that or hear about it, and then we'll start seeing similar cases or similar threats or messages pop up all across the nation, as we saw in November. So I do think there's some trending things like that we will also see that affect the frequency of certain kinds of threats. Where can we find information on what we should be able to expect and how we should respond as parents in the case of an active shooter? I'd like to be prepared and rely on my memory muscle. I'm going to just ask if anybody wants to take this one. I feel like, go ahead.
As I read this question, I thought, well, it's a really good question. And I think that this is an area we don't really have a specific site that you could go to. I think there's a lot of different resources that you could do some of your own personal research, kind of on past experiences and learn from some of the unfortunate situations that have happened elsewhere. But this is something that the question kind of triggered something on the to-do list to look into, is if we could create some sort of that kind of like that safety checklist I referred to earlier, something for families. So thank you for that question. It kind of sparked a thought in my mind too, on some things that we could include for future work.
And I would just add to that, on the resource page in the presentation, there's a link to the OSPI Safety Center. And OSPI stands for the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And the Safety Center is a great resource for lots of things: harassment, intimidation, and bullying, threats, active shooters. So I would definitely take a look at that link for all things safety.
Thanks, Beth. Thank you. And I think too, having a family plan. So, if some person is not close to pick up at the reunification center or that kind of thing, I mean, sometimes, and I think probably the hardest and most excruciating part of a situation like that is that families sometimes have to wait until things are cleared, until students are transported to a different safe reunification place. So I believe that there are some times when there's a lot of waiting involved. And so you'll be getting communication from the school district in that case, right? If something were to happen like that, you'll be getting directions and timing information from the school district on where to go, what to do. But I think families can always be prepared in how, what their structure is, right? Who's available to pick up? Is your contact information up to date with the school? Can we reach you? So those things are always good to have ready to go. Here is one that is about racism. How do schools deal with racism? In the past, my reports about racist behavior were brushed off by teachers and staff. How will this be addressed going forward? So I know.
Diane, do you mind if I jump in?
I was going to actually ask you.
Okay, so I was busy looking through my emails for the latest updates. So the Executive Director of Equity and Family Partnerships, Family and Community Partnerships, is overseeing a bias incident reporting plan. So this, we have had information come to us that perhaps students of color don't feel comfortable reporting things, or that it's not taken seriously. So we have a work group working on this, and they're still in the development stages, but it's very comprehensive. So people feel safe, and it's taken seriously, and then a process of what we do to investigate. So that is in addition to our normal, as Pat Haggerty said, discipline measures that we take at all of our buildings as well.
And
Go
on
ahead,
our,
Beth.
well, I was going to say, on our harassment, intimidation, and bullying reporting form, there are check boxes for racial slurs, racial comments, those types of things that currently could, if a student feels like they are meeting the definition of HIB, and a student and or parent wants to fill out an incident reporting form, which is available on our website and in all of their schools, there are sections in that to address race and racism.
I just wanted to add that I'm very saddened that you feel dismissed by our response to your concerns about racism. And I would say, if I'm the principal, I want you as a parent to make sure you've communicated directly with me so that I can work in partnership with you and with my staff and with my colleagues at the executive level to help eradicate those behaviors and those experiences for kids. Just as I said, in terms of sexual harassment, it is absolutely prohibited and not condoned. And we want to make sure that we are doing our utmost to help all kids feel honored and safe in their identities in our schools.
Thanks, Pat. All right, we have time for just 2 more questions. So this is a good one though. Has COVID impacted behavioral health issues for the kids in our district? COVID seems to be worsening lately. This is a big one. So I realize that we don't have all the answers on this, and we're still learning exactly the extent of this. But is there anyone who wants to speak to this question?
I would anecdotally kind of share a bit what principals have shared. And I think part of what the secondary level has been principal insight is that as students return to learning in person, they forgot what learning in person was like, and they forgot in some respects what socializing with others might be like. And so I think initially they did see quite a lot of behaviors that they were surprised by. You might have, I've heard, the phrase that 7th graders were acting like 5th graders, that kind of thing. But I can report that I think more of late, as students have gotten back more into the rhythm of the life, even though it is a very peculiar life under the pandemic, that I'm not hearing those stories, and kids are conducting themselves pretty much as they have in the past, recognizing that they're still, wearing masks and socially distancing and et cetera. So I think there was some adjustment as they returned, and I don't see it having the same impacts now. But there's no question, and our data from our panorama surveys, the kids have been significantly impacted in their social emotional well-being as a result of the pandemic. And that's work for us to continue to focus on.
Thank you, Pat. The next question is, does Mukilteo School District have communication with local law enforcement or neighboring schools on lockdown or threats by students? The example is recent incidents in other districts. And I can give the short answer, and then others can jump in if you want to add something. Yes, in short, we absolutely do. We partner closely with local law enforcement and other school districts. We are connected very much so, both through the law enforcement and knowing what's going on in our surrounding districts. And we talk all the time. Superintendents, communications directors, safety, all kinds of staff. We are in constant communication when those things happen. And we often are able to band together to help and partner with each other when needed. But anybody else want to say anything to that before we go on to our last question?
I would just add with that also the directors of safety and security in the different school districts communicate. I work closely with our neighboring districts, so we know what behaviors are happening in our neighboring districts, and we support each other also. So along with our districts and local jurisdictions, we're in collaboration frequently.
And then I would just add that with the RAVE panic button app that we have, the staff has, that if we do have a lockdown in one school, the neighboring schools are all notified. And actually some law enforcement patrol officers have that same app, so they can know about it quicker. And so that if one school is not in doing something without the neighboring schools knowing about it. So there's multi-levels of intercommunication right at the school level, and then at the supervisor level, there's multi-layers of communication among law enforcement in the school districts in the area.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for adding that. Okay, and thank you. Somebody says thank you. They appreciate this opportunity. And last one, and this is like the question I know that is on so many parents' minds, and we're doing our best to be very clear about it. COVID safety, what are the chances school will close and be virtual? And of course, people need to be able to plan work schedules, et cetera, around a significant change like that. And I bet you Dr. Brynelson would want this one.
Sure. Thank you, Diane. So I sent out a communication last Friday to all staff and families just to give an update of where we are. So there is no district-wide plan to close buildings. We will not do what, we will not flip everybody into distance learning like we did last year. It's been very clear from the state and Chris Reichdahl, the state superintendent, that districts are not to shut down as long as they can safely provide coverage for students in the building. So it's all about safety in terms of, can we supervise? Do we have enough staff to supervise students on campus? And so we track daily student attendance, we track daily staff attendance, we track fill rates for substitutes. I would encourage you, if you want to come work at a great place, Mukilteo School District is for you. I guarantee you we have a job for you. Tell a neighbor, tell a friend, we are hiring like crazy. However, we do have plans in place. If we do have to temporarily close a classroom or a specific building because we cannot safely supervise kids, if we were to do that, it would be for a very short amount of time, most likely the length of a quarantine, and then students would come back into in-person learning. So it's very different. We have very different requirements. We have very different expectations than we did last year about remote learning. So if we were to shift temporarily, if a building were to temporarily shift to distance learning, students would follow pretty much the same schedule they have now. So for example, last year, our middle schools and high schools for 1 year went to a 3-period day. If we were to have to close for a short amount of time, we would not go to a 3-period day. The students would still have a 6-period day, and 70% of their learning during the day would be synchronous, so live with a teacher. So again, no district-wide plans for shutdown. It's been made very clear to us that we cannot do that at all, any district in the state of Washington, unless they cannot have in-person learning safely in terms of student supervision. If a building or a classroom would have to close down, or all students are in quarantine, for example, then temporarily we do online learning just for the length of a quarantine. So I want you to know, well, I didn't mean it like that, but there's a lot of emotion behind this. So myself as a superintendent, the school board, Diane, Karen, Cindy, we get emails all the time from parents and students that are very passionate one way or the other about this topic. So we know it's on everybody's mind, but again, the only thing I know what to do is to be very transparent with what I know right now, which is it's building or classroom specific, short amount of time. Diane, what would you add?
I think you summed it up very well. I think the toughest part is we may not have a lot of notice if that happens. So that's the tricky part. But as you said, we're doing everything we can, and staff have been Herculean in the flexibility and innovation that they've done in order to keep the doors open so they can be available for in-person learning. So we'll keep doing the best we can, right?
We will, and everybody that's on this webinar, the panelists right now, we all go out and substitute in buildings because our top priority is to make sure that there's enough staff to provide in-person learning. So we have had some awesome experiences. So with that, I really appreciate you attending the safety webinar. We did go over, we were supposed to end at 7 o'clock, but we thought it was important to answer as many questions as we could. So those of you that hung in there and stayed with us over time, we really appreciate it. And hang in there. I know that it's stressful times for all of us. There was a question earlier on, like, why are we having the safety webinar now? So this team was actually able to be proactive before the winter break and think about planning this safety, because I know it's one of the things, if you missed my opening, before the pandemic, as a superintendent, we wanted to have a regular safety updates. I was going to say webinar, but they used to be in person. We had 2 in person, then we went to the pandemic, and so everything's been COVID related. So we're trying to be proactive again and bring up safety topics, especially now that students are in school. So thank you. Have a good night, everybody. And as we leave, wish Mr. Haggerty happy birthday. It is his birthday today. Thank you guys so much.
Happy birthday. And also thank you to our interpreter, Vicente Chavez. I appreciate you being here tonight. Have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye.